Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Wednesday, November 26th. In the United States, the day before our Thanksgiving Day, 4-day holiday weekend. Our guest today at this hour, Colonel Larry Wilkerson. Colonel Wilkerson, always a pleasure, my dear friend. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for accommodating my schedule. We have 8 shows today, and I appreciate your taking the slot that works out for you and for us. I want to talk to you about Benjamin Netanyahu and the failure of the so-called ceasefire in Gaza. But before we get there, we would be remiss if we did not discuss the chaos that seems to be going on with respect to Ukrainian peace negotiations. A big picture, and I've been asking this of everyone today, will the war in Ukraine end on the battlefield or in a conference room?
Neither, in my view. It will not end. We're going to have a low burning conflict probably for the next decade or so. And the forces in Ukraine will be principally responsible for that, with possibly some support from certain characters in Europe if they're not completely cast out of office in the next 9 to 12 months. So I don't think Ukraine is going to do anything but go down to a low simmer that Europe and the West in general can tolerate. But we're not going to get a conclusive end to it. Too much rancor, too much hatred, too much passion, too many deaths, and too many Nazis who will never let it come to rest.
All right, I do want to ask you about the Nazification or the denazification that the Russians are aiming at. But before we get there, will there come a time when the military will collapse and or Zelensky will leave the scene?
If we don't do something fairly soon and through the channels that we now are apparently discussing and the way we're discussing it, even though it is kind of one-sided right now, it could continue for a long time. I don't think it will continue in the way we've seen it go on since the SMO started, though, because Russia is going to annihilate the Russian military or the Ukrainian military, and probably much of the ruling structure with it too, if we don't come to, as I said, an adjudicated end, which will just put it on a low burner.
So how can the people that are negotiating, whoever it is, the Secretary of the Army, Trump's developer colleague from New York, Trump's son-in-law, also a developer from New Jersey, how could they possibly craft an agreement that both Zelensky and the Kremlin could agree to?
They can't. I think what we've seen, and I think this is a progress you can track all the way from Alaska up to the sort of failed summit in Budapest, but it wasn't failed because it really was put off because Trump was not ready, nor was Rubio. The Russians were, so they couldn't go to Budapest if one side was ready and the other one wasn't. But I think what we've seen from Alaska forward is Trump trying and his people trying to find some kind of solution, failing to come up with a balanced one. And so they are increasingly aligned with Putin's position. Zelensky's caught in the middle of that alignment and is trying to wriggle out or trying to get Europeans to help him get out or trying some way to extricate himself. At the same time, he's becoming more and more vulnerable within his own population, even though the press is saying, oh, this consternation over this agreement and everything has really empowered Zelensky. That's hogwash. They're going to get rid of him, and they're going to get rid of him however they have to. And then we're going to go, as I said, to the negotiations where Trump will find something he can prate about, but it's going to be fundamentally for Putin.
Is Trump interested in real lasting peace and a reset of relations with Russia, or something that will allow somebody else like Netanyahu to nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2026?
All of the above, I want to say. I think what he's looking for with regard to Ukraine, and I tried to say that, however, imperfectly, is an end to it, at least down to where it's just simmering and not a real obstacle to making what you just said the case, and that is better and more profitable relations with one of the most powerful countries in the world. armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons. And now with an economy that's kicking on all cylinders, going great, this specious stuff that's coming out of our people about how Russia's about to collapse and everything is just that. It's specious bullcrap. Russia's doing fine and China's doing fine. And the combination, throw India into it, is 60 to 70% of the world's power right now. Look around, Empire.
Right, right. How badly is the Ukrainian military doing as we speak, Colonel Wilkerson?
Extremely badly. I think what we're looking at now is the possibility of, if Russia wants to do it, actually a rolling up of the line, if you will. I don't think they want to do it. I don't think they want to pay the cost.
What does that mean, rolling up of the lines?
In essence, putting the entire Ukrainian military in flight and killing them as they run. The most decisive part of any battle, I don't care if it's drones or what have you, is when the enemy realizes it's over and essentially turns his back on you and goes anywhere he can go to get refuge. That's when it's easiest to kill. In military terms, it's called the exploitation phase. We saw it when the Wehrmacht, for example, was approaching Berlin and had its back to the Russians. That's when you kill the enemy 10, 15, 20 to 1. You just slaughter them. Well, the Russians could enact that just about any time they want to. I don't think they have, because as you and I know, one, Putin does not want to have that entire country in his possession. And two, he doesn't want to lose any more Russian soldiers than he has to. And he's accomplished his objectives at this point. So it's just wrapping up the battlefield, so to speak. And I don't think it'll be that dramatic an exploitation, but it could be if he gets angry and he decides that, okay, it's going to be over, really over. And, oh, Poland, I'm going to be right on your border when it's over. Maybe you'll like that. Maybe you won't.
Let me bring you back to the answer you gave when I asked you if the war would end in the battlefield or in a conference room, and you said neither. Colonel, isn't the last thing Putin wants to be governing an area that has an insurgency in it?
Yes, but I don't see how he gets out of that unless he's prepared, as I just said, to exterminate those
kill
people.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Right? Well, when the person we admire a lot because of his diplomatic skills, Sergei Lavrov, says denazification, I mean, what does he mean? I mean, that's an ideology. Are they talking about killing everyone who embraces that ideology, or making the ideology so publicly unacceptable that it goes into the woodwork?
Well, you know, the Nuremberg tribunal position of the Soviets was, let us have them, take them back to Moscow, have a show trial, and we'll kill them all. One much different with the Brits, who said, let's just have a firing squad and shoot them all in Germany. So, yeah, that's a solution, but that kind of solution is only impactful and it's only executable if you have completely defeated your enemy. There's nothing left in them. You've just unconditionally surrendered if you're the enemy. We're not at that point, but I do think you could deal with the situation in Ukraine if you actually got what Ukraine has never had, a truly functioning, aspirated, liberal democracy. That is to say, the people in Ukraine had the major control. And the apparatus above the people was set up to do that. Some of the oligarchs have to, they have to mend their ways at least. And Ukraine has to become a country that is reasonably functioning in a democratic fashion.
Was it reasonably functioning under Viktor Yanukovych before John McCain and Lindsey Graham and Victoria Nuland and MI6 and Mossad and CIA and all those other people, Barack Obama, decided to overthrow him?
Not really. I was there in 2002 and 2003 when we were dealing with Ukraine. And as I've said before, I had two responsibilities of great country significance at that time. North Korea, I was on that working group, and Ukraine. And I will tell you, we came to the conclusion in both working groups that both states were criminal states. Ukraine is one of the most corrupt states on the face of the earth. It has been for so many years. And the Russians contributed to that, of course. In fact, the Russians probably contributed as much as any Ukrainian. So you don't fix that in a day. The NATO criteria, Judge, for allowing countries to come in is more rigorous than the EU's, more rigorous probably than anybody else's organization in the world. We just put that aside. Bill Clinton started it and everybody else just went along with it. We just put it all aside. We let countries into NATO and we're, creating Ukraine to come into NATO that were utterly corrupt.
Let me ask you about Marco Rubio. Is it apparent that neither the Trump administration nor the Kremlin trusts Marco Rubio because he's part of the Lindsey Graham, Tom Cotton, John Bolton, Mike Pompeo? You know some of these people personally. War will bleed Putin dry.
I wouldn't trust him if I were they, that's for sure. I certainly wouldn't trust him after those remarks he made a couple of days ago, where he told the American people to shut up, essentially. He knew what he was doing in killing people on the high seas. I can't imagine Sergei Lavrov and Vladimir Putin didn't, want to vomit over that kind of comment. I mean, here's a guy, Secretary of State of the empire, and he's telling the American people, don't ask me these questions because I know. You don't need to know. I know that these people are national security threats to the United States of America. Therefore, we can kill them. Well,
Right.
That is totally false.
Who are they, Marco? What is the evidence against them?
Exactly.
Why aren't they entitled to a trial? What about the
Exactly.
Constitution you swore to preserve, protect, and defend?
You got it.
Pretty basic stuff, Colonel. No, but my point is, why is Trump using his billionaire construction company buddy and his neophyte son-in-law instead of the Secretary of State?
I think he fears the Secretary of State for one thing, and he doesn't want to give him any notoriety, fame, fortune, or whatever that he can keep away from him. Second, I'm not sure he trusts the Secretary of State any further than he can spit, and I wouldn't were he either. So he trusts these other people. That's you can't say too much at this point in time for Witkoff's diplomatic capabilities. He's proven he doesn't have much. But then you never know how much he's held back by Trump or how much he goes out and does something and Trump reverses it or someone else reverses it, because there's not much continuity or unity in this administration at all. Anybody can speak up at any moment in a way that fouls whatever Donald Trump started in the first place. That's a very dangerous way to run an administration. Even the one I was in with Cheney, there was a voice. That voice was Dick Cheney's. You might not have liked it, but that voice pertained to every issue all the time. And you knew where you were operating. You don't in this administration.
Our mutual friend and colleague, Scott Ritter, is of the view that, and I've heard this from others as well, Mrs. Adelson, when she gave candidate Trump the $100 million check for the PAC, the Political Action Committee, wasn't going into his pocket, said, I want Marco Rubio as your vice president. Trump said, I can't stand him, but the next best I can do is Secretary of State. Does that make sense to you?
It does. A similar thing happened with John Bolton in the Bush administration when I was there, a trade-off. I think what I heard Tucker Carlson asked the president, or was asked by the president or told the president, however it transpired, that he didn't want Marco Rubio to be anywhere near the presidency, i.e. vice president, because then they would assassinate Trump, was a true statement.
Wow. Well,
they want to get
Scott also claims that to this day, I'm going to use his word, Trump loathes Secretary Rubio.
I don't doubt that. I really don't. I think he loathes Lindsey Graham too, and the two men are cut from the same cloth.
Wow. He loathes the guy that he plays golf with and who whispers neocon bloodthirsty comments into his ear when they're in the golf cart. Let me switch gears, Colonel. Was the Trump proclaimed UN approved Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, Gaza peace agreement a farce.
You left out Tony Blair.
You're right. Okay. Throw in another war criminal.
Yep. It is a farce. No, it's not a farce. That's too kind, and that's not very generous to the Palestinians. What it is a codification of everything that Israel was doing and will continue to do on a slightly lower burner in a general UN-blessed fashion. That is to say, we have a Security Council resolution condoning genocide. So that's the simplest way to put it.
In 1 week, this past week, the IDF slaughtered 100 civilians. The Israelis bombed Lebanon. The IDF refused an American surgeon permission to come into Gaza to perform life-saving bowel reconstruction surgery on children, and they won't give a reason why they won't let him in. And he's waiting for a decision from a court ordering the IDF to let him in. So Judge, what has changed since the agreement, other than its now appearance of international acceptance?
And that's the whole reason for it. That's the whole reason. Let's bury it in international acceptance and a few Indonesian peacekeepers or whatever, and let's let everything just go on a slightly lower burner, but ultimately we'll do the same thing. And oh, by the way, we're going to build a condo for those Palestinians who survived the slaughter, and we'll put them in it. Call it condo prison.
Who in their right mind would trust Benjamin Netanyahu to commit to any agreement?
No one. I did a little research last week, and there is not a single day of either the Lebanese ceasefire or the so-called Gaza ceasefire that Bibi Netanyahu, the IDF, or Israel has not ignored and killed at least a dozen or so people. Not a single day.
So what will stop this? The support for Israel is bleeding in the United States, particularly with the under 35 crowd, and especially with the under 35 MAGA crowd. Will the president get a message? Stop letting Bibi Netanyahu push you around. They slaughtered 34 sailors. They embrace the greatest spy on American national security in history. They laugh at you behind your back, Donald Trump, and still you give them whatever they want.
We would get a good answer to that question, Judge, if Trump were to suddenly recall our ambassador to Israel and fire him publicly in Washington.
He should be recalled and fired after the embrace of Jonathan Pollard. You know as well as anybody, Phil Giraldi's coming up after you, and he, of course, was in the CIA when this Pollard stuff happened. But you know as well as anybody what Pollard did.
Yes.
And how harmful to the U.S. were the secrets that he stole, and how did some of them get to Moscow?
I see a lot of his motivation. You know, people say, well, it's the Zionist motivation. It's the Zionist this, it's the Zionist that. I see as a lot of his motivation as having been money. That makes it even worse, in my view. I mean, if he had some ideology that he was captured by, that's one thing. But money, that's what we shoot people for.
Wow. But it galled me. Phil Giraldi sent me a picture of Netanyahu smiling. I never saw a smile like this on his face from ear to ear as he was either fist bumping or elbow bumping this character whose sentence was commuted by Donald Trump.
Yes.
Now, he was out of prison, but he was on some sort of a modified house arrest. He couldn't travel, blah, 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 blah. Mrs. Adelson, or then her husband, Sheldon Adelson, said, Jonathan's got to go back to Israel. Can you make it happen? A week later, his sentence was commuted. He was back in Israel. He was treated as a hero. They named a public square or a street after him. Now he's going to run for the Knesset. And what you're referring to, without an announcement on his public schedule and without telling the White House, Mike Huckabee, with whom I worked at Fox for 2 years, a Southern Baptist preacher who is the United States ambassador to Israel, invited him to the embassy and met him there.
Right. That's the way I understand it. Trump has 2 strikes against him now with regard to Miriam Adelson. He moved our embassy to Jerusalem in violation of God knows how many UN Security Council resolutions and of common sense. And now he's done this with Pollard. Strike 3 is coming up, Donald.
Well, your colleague, Colonel McGregor, says that if we invade Venezuela and it doesn't go well without a declaration of war and body bags start showing up, Trump's presidency is in jeopardy.
I would say so too. I don't think he's going to do that. I think this is all a show of force, as it were, and he's going to get everything he possibly can out of. And as I understand it, there are some things forthcoming, Maduro, before he backs off, and that's all it is.
How much money has he and Quick Draw Pete spent sending the Gerald R. Ford, all these other ships, and it's now 18,000 Marines and soldiers to Puerto Rico at the ready?
Stubby pencil work shows about, probably at this point, given the time Ford's been in transit and such, a little over $1 billion.
Wow.
It'll get a lot more because it's every day you maintain that kind of force at sea in that proximity, it gets more and more expensive.
What would 18,000 Marines and Army infantry do? Storm the beaches of Venezuela as if it were a Caribbean island,
that's a rough figure of the people from the 18th Airborne Corps plus the others that were added in at the last minute that were used to snatch Noriega out of Panama. So I was a little uneasy when I heard that figure. It chimed in my head.
In other words, it's almost the same figure. So they're going to send 18,000 troops to kidnap Maduro?
Well, it's even stranger than that, Judge. You look at the terrain in Venezuela, you look at the size of Venezuela, you look at the population of Venezuela, put it against Panama, and it's like a postage stamp and a portrait. I mean, you can't make comparisons other than say how stupid it is to take on Venezuela with this few forces.
Wow.
And I'm hearing some serious stuff about the missiles that the Russians have put in Venezuela or are going to put in Venezuela. Things like Oreshniks, for example. Goodbye, God. Jerry Ford. Goodbye.
Wow. Well, if they sink the Ford or if they shoot down fighter jets with Marines in them, and the Congress has not debated this or declared war, what defense to this reprehensible presidential behavior will Trump possibly have? There you go. That's the standard for anybody that doesn't know what he's holding up. That is the standard copy of the United States Constitution. There's also the Declaration of Independence in there that we all carry with us. I guarantee you the president of the United States doesn't have that in his pocket, Larry.
I'll bet not, too. And I just looked at it again to make sure I was right. Ike Skelton once told me, holding this up, this same copy from the Cato Institute, he told me, he said, Larry, there's 10 pages in here on the Congress, and there's maybe 3 on the executive. A lot of those pages on the Congress are about the military. This business of Congress having no power against Pete Hegseth, against Donald Trump and so forth, is hogwash. And they're going to wake up to that sooner or later, even the Republicans, because we are doing irreparable damage to our government.
Yes, we are. Well, yes, the president is. You and I are not. We're trying to point it out. Colonel Larry, thank you very much. I hope, as horrible as this is, I must end with have a happy Thanksgiving.
Well, you got to keep your spirits up.
Yeah. Oh boy.
You too.
All right. Larry, thank you very much. All the best. You have a great holiday.
You too. Save me some of that apple pie.
Oh, yes, you got it. You got it. All right, my friends, coming up, Phil Giraldi at 3 o'clock, Max Blumenthal at 3:30, Professor John Mearsheimer at 4. Tomorrow, 8 hours of Colonel Douglas McGregor Marathon, starting at 10 o'clock in the morning. Everything the Colonel said to us in the past week. Monday at 3 o'clock, a joint production of Zero Hedge and Judging Freedom, a debate on who is MAGA and what does it mean today. Dinesh D'Souza versus Dave Smith, yours truly as the moderator. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.